should check it out. But this cover crop calculator is a really nice tool, pretty interesting to look at. It can help you identify the different cover crops to plant and what kind of fertility you add to your soil, etc. It's designed a little bit for the bigger scale farmer, but I gleaned some information for my soil farm. Next slide. So be sure to check that out time surfing the web. Next slide, please. But again, cover crops are typically plants grown as part of a rotation and not necessarily grown for monetary value, but really are designed to protect and build our soils. We don't want to suck all the nutrients out of the soil and say thanks, see you later. We want to be very cognizant of our impact. When you're using cover crops that are incorporated into the soil, which we call green manures, they add nitrogen and other nutrients as well as organic matter, which is super important. And so this is going to be a huge part of what you're doing on the farm, well before you even plant your actual crop that you're going to harvest. Next slide, please. I did want to direct your attention to just some different types of cover crops that we have used on our farm that we really like, and this is just an example of using a cover crop as a living mulch. This is our pathway around the perimeter of the farm, and it's a sweet clover. Actually, it's a mix of red clover, sweet clover, white clover, and a few other things. And definitely know that there's malva in there too. But basically, your cover crops, if you're using it as a living mulch, it's something that I want to be able to mow and kind of cut back. But this is a great way to protect the soil from erosion and compaction. This is somewhere that we walk all the time. Sometimes we drive the tractor down this path, and usually it's wheelbarrows. So this is something that we don't want to destroy the structure of the soil. So we always keep it covered in something. One that I really adore is hairy vetch, to use as a green manure in the field. It can overwinter, which is nice, but it's also a little bit harder to incorporate on a small scale. It gets stuck in a tiller really easily, so we kind of have to chop it up with shovels first, but on a small scale it works really well. Next slide. Again, different cover crops and green manures have different properties. This is just a table of some of their properties and what they're good for. I love the grain crops like rye and barley and oats and things and wheat, because they are excellent at not only suppressing weeds but loosening soil, and they have this really beautiful structure of roots when you pull them up that it's just really neat to find out what it's doing to these. We had very heavy clay type soils at our farm, so it was really nice to see what they did to loosen the soil. Next slide. If you want, the Oregon State University Extension developed this fantastic DVD series called Weed 'em and Reap, and if you can, check them out. It's a 2-part series, and it talks a lot about using cover crops as living mulches and different uses for cover crops that you might not have come across before. So if you have a minute, check it out. It's probably on YouTube as well. Next slide. So moving along, talking about protecting our soils, we have to address soil cultivation, especially for if you're doing any sort of vegetable crop production. And just quickly, there are some benefits to soil cultivation. It can break up some soil pans, it can control weeds, you can manage some pathogens or insects, but it's also really easy to do some pretty devastating things with soil cultivation. Next slide. The impacts of excessive tillage are listed here. Basically, the thing I want for you to remember to take home is that, you know, it's our own ignorance, our human error that can have this destructive effects on our soil. So if we try our best and try our best to not excessively till on the farm, then we can avoid some of these impacts. I think for small scale food production, it's really easy. Sorry, I'm just reading this thing about people are having trouble with the sound, so I hope that it's been fixed. So I'm just going to carry on. But it is easy to excessively till, but it's also easy to make a plan and get around it. So next slide, please. Conservation tillage, most of you have probably heard about it, but basically it's reducing the amount of tillage that we have by planting directly into our crop residues from the previous year. There's all sorts of conservation tillage methods like living mulch or zone tillage or ridge tillage or no-till, but basically if we're trying to conserve the quality of our soil structure, we are integrating crop rotation, integrating green manures and cover crops, and then reducing the amount of tillage that we do on the farm. And that, in a sense, is conservation tillage. Next slide, please. ATTRA, that we've mentioned before, is an excellent resource if you're interested in learning more about conservation tillage techniques. So hop onto their website and you can utilize all the information they have on their online. Let's talk a little bit about weeds, because I have yet to meet a sustainable or organic farmer that doesn't have any weeds on their farm. Basically, we don't have clean fields if we're farming sustainably. It's completely different than conventional farming. And the first and foremost when we're talking about weeds is that you've got to do the homework. Know what you have in your field. Whether or not it's a weed by definition, I don't care. Know what you're growing. And I love this quote, "Weeds are a plant that we have not yet found a use for." I think every single plant in the field has some sort of purpose, whether it is to add organic matter back to the soil, add different nutrients back to the soil, whether it's to tell us a little bit about our soils. I've found that malva and field bindweed, they're really sort of my nemesis weeds, but they also tell me where my hardpan or my clunky soils are that need addressing. So every weed or every plant has a story to tell, and it's up to us to kind of do the homework and really make sure that it's one that we want to get rid of. Weeds have a great capacity to hold water and to provide cover and prevent erosion. They provide beneficial or habitat for beneficial insects. So know your weeds before you jump to conclusions. Next slide, please. There's an incredible amount of books and online sources for weed identification. So certainly keep a little handbook, but also don't forget to use your extension educator in your community. They're a great source. Most of them can really good at identifying different weeds and pests. So don't hesitate to bring it into town and have some help with identification. Tools for control. Well, good luck, but you can prevent weeds, and you can get to a happy sort of symbiotic relationship with your weeds on the farm. But basically, be smart about it. Don't bring weed seeds onto the farm in the first place. And that really goes back to, where are we getting our compost? Where are we getting our off-farm inputs? Raw manure, that's going to have seeds. So what do? Use composted manure. Mulches, that's probably going to have a lot of seed supply as well. So be careful with the hay that you bring in. Pasture hay might be a little more seedy than just alfalfa, but just kind of look at your mulches and know that there's probably going to be some seeds in there that are going to be introduced. Straw tends to be cleaner in terms of seed that we don't want, but also keep in mind that it does have the higher carbon type of ratio when we're incorporating it into our soils at the end of the year. So just be aware of that. Next slide. Again, compost, but we have to have a hot compost system to be able to get the temperature even throughout the whole pile and kill the seeds. Field bindweed and malva, for example, have a very high tolerance to heat. They're very resistant to heat, and so killing those seeds can be kind of tricky. But just compost things and know that the cleaner your source, the cleaner your field will be in terms of weeds. Next slide. Well, this might seem pretty obvious, but it's surprising to see how many people things get ahead of them, and I'm sure we'll all be there again at some point, but don't let your weeds go to seed in the first place. Weeds have cycles that they go through, and you just have to kind of keep on task. This is a picture of our onion beds that we sort of let go accidentally over the course of a couple weeks. Just didn't get to them, just had so much stuff to do, and they're very tedious to weed once the weeds get big. And so you can see how on the right hand side of that picture, purslane and pigweed had overtaken the beds, and it took us forever to weed through them by hand. So it's really something that you might have to consider. Is it worth continuing this harvest from the field just to talk about weeds and trying to get these things out of here? Hand weeding, it's very labor intensive, very expensive. So yes, keep a handle on weeds at the early get-go. Next slide. We can prevent weeds from going to seed, but we can also, the seeds are going to be there regardless. So we want to do light cultivation on both sides of our rows. I say shallow tillage because it's really important to not dig too deep in terms of when we're cultivating for weeds, because we don't want to bring any of those weed seeds that are in the subsoil, we don't want to bring those to the surface and just create more weeds. We just kind of want to get them when they're small seedlings, nip them at the bud, and you're done. This kind of cultivation, this shallow tillage, is really effective in terms of keeping weed populations at bay. Different planting techniques also are really great for helping keep a handle on weeds. And basically, I went from kind of being a lazy, la-ti-da aesthetic farmer, like, oh, let's plant in a circle and a spiral, it will be really fun and beautiful, to let's plant in nice straight rows because it's so much easier to manage and weed. So I'm going to suggest that once you get over the aesthetic factor, plant in straight rows, and get a precision type of planter like an earthway seeder or something like that. You get a uniform stand, you seed appropriately, and you can manage weeds much, much more effectively. Next slide. Also remember that you can cover crop the year before, and that helps quite